Easier for its citizens to carry machine guns, the White House had its mind on violence in the Middle East, specifically a militant Israeli group known as Sav-9. They've been targeting humanitarian aid supplies to Gaza and trying to stop them getting through, arguing that any aid is a gift to Hamas. Well, now the US has imposed sanctions on Sav-9. Our Washington correspondent Will Vernon told me about that organization and how they've been blocking aid convoys.
According to the State Department, Paul, Sav-9 is a violent extremist Israeli group that has been blocking, harassing and damaging aid convoys. And the State Department said in their statement earlier that the group's members have been organising these blockades for months. Some of them have turned violent, trucks have been set on fire and drivers injured. Now, the Sav-9 group has released a statement criticising the decision by America to impose sanctions, and they claim their protests are peaceful. They admit that they organised roadblocks, but they deny causing any damage to people or property. And Sav-9 claim that humanitarian aid going into Gaza goes directly into the hands of Hamas and empowers the militant group. And they also claim that the families of hostages still being held in Gaza are among their members.
You said there that Sav-9 has been doing this for months. Why then is the US imposing sanctions now?
I think this is a sign of growing frustration with the Israelis among US officials over key issues such as the supply of humanitarian aid into Gaza. President Biden, other US officials, they've made repeated calls for Israel to allow more assistance into the territory. The US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, he's just been on another diplomatic tour of the Middle East. As part of that, he visited an aid warehouse in Jordan, as well as this key checkpoint on the border between Gaza and Israel where aid is supposed to be let through. Now, of course, ultimately, it is the Israeli authorities who are responsible for the flow of humanitarian aid, and these sanctions are targeting civilians. And I think that's because the US is still trying to carefully tread the line between putting more pressure on Israel to take steps to improve the humanitarian situation in Gaza, whilst at the same time continuing to support Israel more generally.
Joe Biden has been carrying out this very delicate balancing act, hasn't he, trying to appease the pro-Israeli lobby in the United States whilst keeping on board those Democrats whose sympathies are more with the Palestinians. Is this a sign that he's veering a little towards the latter at the moment?
Of course, critics will say that despite the months of conflict in which tens of thousands of Palestinian civilians have been killed, despite horrifying incidents such as the killing of those World Central Kitchen aid workers, the killing of those civilians in the refugee camp in Rafah more recently, despite all of that, America still hasn't placed any sanctions, any restrictions at all on IDF units, right? The Israeli military or commanders. It's only so far targeted settlers and now this Sav-9 group, so civilians. And some will say that actually these sanctions won't do anything. This is a grassroots Israeli group that won't be affected by US sanctions. But I think that Washington is hoping that this will send a message, that this will be a warning shot across the bows of Benjamin Netanyahu.
Will Vernon.